I've been in pastoral church ministry, paid church ministry for about 27 years. And I started out in a relatively small church in the Twin Cities in Minnesota in the U.S. Our church was maybe about 600 or 700 people. At that time, that was not a small church, but around that size. And I had the unique opportunity to grow up with that church as it grew, and I got an opportunity out of that to take on different roles. I started out as a facility manager, so I have a lot of credibility in my current church because I understand people who do that work because I did that work for a number of years. So setup, take down, cleaning toilets, all that stuff is what I started doing in the church. And I did that for about a year and a half. And prior to that, I worked for McDonald's Corporation, McDonald's Restaurants. I worked there for 17 years. And I tell people that everything I learned about ministry, I learned at McDonald's. And there's some real truth to that. I learned how to work with people. I learned how to work with complainers. I learned how to work with processes and systems, management, HR, finance, all of those kinds of things. So it was a really excellent training grounds for me, although I didn't realize it at the time, as I made my way through the ministry ranks at the church that I worked at. So started off as a facility manager. As we grow, they needed somebody to do our financial things, and so I took over the finance role, and then I took over the HR role. And over time, I became kind of the director of operations in our church, and as it continued to grow. And about the time we were a church of, I would say maybe 3,000 in a small building doing multiple services over the weekend. So we would have 3 services on Saturday night and 4 services on Sunday. So it was very complex and challenging to get all of that to come together. And out of that time period, we decided to move to another location and build a new church. And it was at that time that they asked if I'd be the executive pastor, which was really taking the operations side as well as the ministry side. And I was the executive pastor there for about 16 years, total of 20 years at that church. And then I was called down to Phoenix, Arizona, and ended up at Scottsdale Bible Church, and I've been their executive pastor for the last 7 years. So, that's a little bit of my background, just so that you have some context from where I'm coming from. I will tell you that almost everything I'm going to talk to you today about, I came to these conclusions because I messed it up. I did it poorly. I had to learn the hard way. And if there's anything I can do to help you not make the mistakes I made, then I'll consider it a success. But I've learned a lot, and I've learned it through trial and error. I haven't come up through that to my role the traditional way through seminary and all that kind of thing. And so we have people at our church who do that really, really well, and they're very gifted in that. I stay kind of more in the management leadership realm of what I do at our church. And Scottsdale Bible Church has 4 campuses in the Phoenix Valley. We have about 10,000 people on any particular Sunday at this point. And having come through the, what's the thing we just came through? COVID. Having come through COVID, trying to rebuild and all that stuff that has come with it has been a really interesting journey as well. And some of these things come out of that reality. So I wanted to talk first about why leadership is important. I don't think anybody would necessarily argue that, but it is interesting how in the church world, a lot of times people who are wired for shepherding and pastoring don't appreciate leadership and management quite as much. That's just a reality. It's a tension. I talk with our people a lot about problems we can solve versus tensions we manage. That's a tension we're always managing. We're trying to find the right balance between leadership management and shepherding. And depending on how large your organization is, you've got to do more leadership and management. It's just part of the requirement. Whether you like it or not, it has to be done. Otherwise, you can't actually, continue to grow. So we're always trying to balance those things out. But leadership is super important. A couple of stats that I thought were important. 10% of the population has a natural gifting for leadership. We like to think that everybody can lead, and I think everybody can lead at some level. either in their families, in their organizations, in their relationships. Leadership is expressed by everyone at some level, one way or another. But statistically, only about 10% of the population has the natural gifting for leadership. So one of the mistakes we make in any organization, but especially in the church world, is we assume that everybody can lead. And so, if they're a good pastor, if they're really good with people or whatever, we just assume, oh, they'll be a good leader. Put them into a leadership role, and we end up stepping back and go, how did we get that wrong? And it's not that they're the wrong person, it's just that they're in the wrong role. And it's our fault because we make the assumption that everybody can lead. And the truth is, leadership is not that common as a gift. Second, 79% of people who leave an organization do so because of lack of appreciation. It's an interesting stat there. We tend to think that people leave organizations because they don't like somebody or they don't get along with colleagues. Most of the time, they just don't feel appreciated. And I hate to say it, but I think the church is actually worse at this than a lot of secular organizations are. The church assumes you're going to sacrifice your life to be a pastor or to be on staff. They just make the assumption that that's just what you're going to do. And we often, as leaders in the church, forget to really express appreciation because sacrifice is expensive and it costs something every day. And we don't do a good enough job appreciating people. 48% of employees view their organization's leadership as high quality. That's kind of stated in a way that sounds positive, but what it should say is less than 50% of employees view their organization's leadership as high quality. Now, that's not just churches. This is just broad. But think about that for a minute. Half of the people in the world, no matter what organization they're working for, would say that their leadership at the top of their organization is subpar. It's not what it should be. That's kind of a scary stat to me. 69% of employees say that they would work harder if they felt their efforts were better recognized. This one I don't think plays out as much in the church because I do think that most of our people are pretty intentional about what they do, and they want to work hard. They're working for the Lord. But almost, 2/3 here, 70% of people would work harder if they just felt like they were recognized a little bit. Finally, 13% of employees worldwide report feeling engaged in their work. In the US, it's 32%, but still, both of those numbers are really low. And all that to say, that's why leadership is important. If you are able to lead well in your organization, whether you're leading in a church or you're leading in a nonprofit or even in a secular job, if you can lead well, you're gonna be miles ahead of most organizations anywhere else. I'm going to talk about 5 lessons to help you lead effectively in this crazy world we're in. And I do think it's a crazy world. It's getting more crazy. I do think that these things are more important today than they were 25 years ago. When I first started in ministry, it was very easy for me to say, okay, here's the 5 things we're going to do. Go and do them. It's not the world we live in anymore. People don't respond well to that directive approach to leadership and management. We've got to do a better job, especially people like me who come out of the baby boomer world. I'm like the youngest baby boomer there can possibly be, but I'm still a baby boomer. And I do have a baby boomer mindset. I came up in that. I was trained in that. I understand how to lead directively. I don't always understand how to lead collaboratively. And that's a skill I'm still trying to get better and better at over time. But hopefully these 5 lessons will be helpful to you. First lesson that I would say is be a wise steward of your calling. And I don't know if you're aware of Randy Alcorn. He wrote a book called The Treasure Principle. It's one of my most favorite books in the entire world. It changed my life when I read it. And he talks about time, talent, and treasure. It's such a simple book. It's a very small book. But in that, what he talks about is how you steward your time, how you steward your talent, and how you steward your treasure. And I think it's been really important. I think it's important for all of us to be intentional about this. So how you steward your time. You're not winning if you're investing time in ministry at the expense of time with spouse, family, friends, and neighbors. Again, this is not a baby boomer idea. It used to be that you were winning if that was happening. If you were sacrificing yourself on the altar of success It didn't matter what happened at home. Nobody cared about that. In today's world, even in the secular world, people are paying attention to this. And they're realizing that the younger folks among us, the people who are coming into the workforce, have experienced that from their parents, of which I was one of them, I'm sad to admit. They're experiencing that. They grew up in that, and they will not live that way in their own world. I get emotional about this because I was guilty. In many ways, I was guilty. I still can be a workaholic. I worked from early morning till late night, way too much. I was very successful in my secular world. I won all the awards in the McDonald system. I made really good money. And even when I went into the church world, I carried that work style with me. And I didn't ignore my kids, but I didn't pay attention. I didn't have the right balance there by any stretch. So you're not winning if you're investing time in ministry at the expense of those important things in your life. That doesn't mean you should ignore your work life, obviously. But what it does mean is that you have to do other things to make yourself balanced in that way. Another thing about stewarding your time is to be available. If you're a leader in your organization, one of the most important things that your people need to know from you is that they can talk to you if they want to. And I don't care how high you are in the organization. I have about 200 employees at Scottsdale Bible Church. I tell them regularly, if my door is open, walk in, talk to me, ask your question, whatever it might be. Make yourself available. And it's not just having an open door policy. It's actually walking around and talking to people so that you demonstrate that availability is an important value to you. You'd be surprised at how many times I walk by a desk and just say hi, and we end up in a deep conversation about something that's going on in their lives or in their work. And you just can't pay for that kind of connection. And so availability is a big piece of that. In the best way possible, fully integrate your family life and your ministry life. And I don't really like the way that a lot of people talk about what they call work-life balance. I don't think in ministry you can really have work-life balance. In a secular job, you can pursue work-life balance because you can have everything's in a box and you can kind of plan it out that way. In ministry, it usually doesn't work that way. You get the call at 5:30 in the afternoon when you're at dinner with your family, somebody just died. You can't go, well, I'll talk to you on Monday, And so work-life balance is a strategy that doesn't make much sense to me. What I like to say instead is we need to have work-life integration. And so when you're in ministry, you need to integrate your work and your family together. And so when I was young in ministry, I was the facility manager, and after church on Sunday afternoon, we had to pick up the trash and we had to vacuum. And my kids did that all with me. My wife, we did all that stuff together. We tried to integrate what we did so that they understood what my life was like. And then as I got into more of the ministry side, as often as I could, I would involve them in whatever that ministry effort was so that when I had to leave for something, they understood it. I think a perfect world is when the spouse, whether it's guy or girl, and the kids are integrated into the ministry work life to such a level that when something comes up, the family surrounds that person, they pray for them, and they go and do what they need to do. Doesn't mean you have permission to skip kids, games all the time, but there's got to be some level of reality in that. If you're going to be in ministry, you're not always going to be able to do everything in every area. It just doesn't work that way. I've learned the hard way to schedule with interruptions in mind. So as much as I love to just fill my calendar from Monday through Thursday, it's kind of our core work week is Monday through Thursday. What I've learned is that when I schedule it that way, any interruption that comes messes the whole week up. And now I've got to try to come in early, stay late, whatever it might be. And so what I've learned is that I schedule every meeting for 1 hour, and I attempt to have every meeting last about 30 to 40 minutes. And what that does for me is that I end up with about 20 minutes in between my scheduled things throughout the work week. And it gives me an opportunity to handle those last minute things that just came up, somebody who needs to have 5 minutes, whatever it might be, or I need to go check on something. And so scheduling your day in such a way that it's not so full is wise. Now, you might not get as much done. You might end up having to do things at a pace that's not as fast as you want to get it done. But I guarantee you that your people will appreciate the leadership in that because you're going to be more available. So schedule with interruptions in mind. If your span of care requires more than reasonable hours per week, and I don't know what that is for you in your context, then your span of care is too big. What I'm trying to get at there is in ministry, whatever ministry, whether it's church, nonprofit, whatever it is, in ministry we tend to build things beyond what we can support. And, because we're excited about what God is doing, we're excited when there's a door that gets opened up, and so we like to just charge through it, we like to go after it and make things happen. And when we look in the rearview mirror, we often find out that we've taken on way more than we can actually handle. And so we go from working, like in the United States, I consider a full salaried work week about 45 hours a week. So that's about what I expect from our folks. And what I find is that they're starting to work 50 and 55 and 60 hours a week. It's not because I gave them any more work to do. It's because they took on more work, because they're passionate about what they do, and they don't know themselves what they're doing to themselves. So I have to be the one who's saying, you need to cut this back. You need to drop this program that you added. You need to, find somebody to lead this, some other person to lead this, whatever it might be. That's an essential role of a leader, is to step in on their behalf because they don't see it themselves and help them regulate their world a little bit better. And so adjusting that span of care is really important. And then, I think the example that you and I set in that area is critical. I can talk all day long about how important that is to me, but then if I do all the things that I tell other people not to do, they don't think I'm being real. They don't think I'm telling the truth. They basically conclude that though he says that, the way he acts is the way he wants me to actually act. And so I have to do the same things. That's the hardest thing for me, because in my stage of life, my kids are, adults. They're out on their own. They're in Minnesota. I'm in Phoenix. We're 2,000 miles apart. My wife works at the church also. I have the ability to work longer days. I have more margin to do some of those things. And I do that a little bit more at home when, but I really work to make sure that my office hours are structured in a way that doesn't make it seem like I'm lying to people, I come in quite early in the morning before anybody gets there. They don't know that I've been there 2.5 hours already by the time they come in. And I leave before most of them. So I'm trying to set that example so that when they start to get into those kinds of situations, it's obvious to them, oh, I should deal with that. So I think that's important, stewarding your time. I'm going to talk a little bit about talent. I know this is a shock to all of you, but you're not good at everything. And in the church world, we often are convinced that we're good at everything because people come up and tell us we're good at everything. They're very, the people in the church love you. They appreciate what you do. They tell you all the time what a great leader you are, or, we just love you here and all that kind of thing. So we can start to believe ourselves that we're actually pretty good at everything. And the truth is, when we step back from it, we're not good at everything. You will not get to do only the things in which you will excel. Our culture in the United States is such that over the last, I would say, 10 or 15 years, there's been this movement to get people into their sweet spots where they only have to do the things they're really good at. We've even gotten to the point where people will say, even if it's in their job, I'm not good at that, so you need to find somebody else to do that. Like, no, you have to do that. That's part of your job. We can't get that segmented in that kind of thing. So you will not get to do only the things you're good at, but you can work to position yourself to spend at least 50% of your time doing the things that you're really gifted to do. And you might think 50% is a low percentage. I would say in my own personal experience, 50% is a pretty good goal because stuff comes at you. There's all kinds of things that come at you. There's all kinds of things that require your time and your energy and your effort, and you're not great at all of them, and yet you are the one who's assigned to do those things. And so if you can spend half of your work week doing the things that you're gifted to do and that really fill your tank up, I would say that's really good. And for some, you can get up to 75, 80%. Certainly possible, but it's not typical, I don't think. So because of that, you need to know the things for which you must be good enough at. At our church, we use Microsoft as our tool for managing calendaring, email, just everything. Everything is in Microsoft Outlook. And we schedule that way. Well, I have a bunch of Mac people who work for me who hate Outlook. And my answer to them has been, you don't have to love Outlook, you just have to use it. And if you want to take everything in Outlook and fix it up and change it and dump it into your Apple product, that's fine. But at the end of the day, you have to be good enough to use Outlook so that you can accept meeting requests and those kinds of things, so that you can do email. You just have to be good enough. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to love it to death, but you got to use it. And so there's some tools like that we have to put a stake in the ground and say, this is how we're doing it at this church. A lot of churches use Google, for their stuff. There's a lot of different ways to do it. We've chosen this one. Some love it, some hate it, but everybody has to be good enough at it. And then we have to have a commitment to always grow in this area and to show it. It's really critical that we steward our talent well. I don't think that I'm a very gifted, organized person. A lot of people think I am, but I've used the tools that I have to be organized. On my own, I'm a complete mess. If you look at my desk in my office, it's not pretty. I got papers everywhere. I'm an unorganized leader, and I'm embarrassed by that a lot. But the reality is I have to commit myself to continue to grow in that area and to utilize the tools that are at my disposal so that I can actually continue to be effective at the job that I've been called to do. And then help others come along. Self-explanatory. Okay, 1 Peter 4:10 says, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. I think this fits really well with this. Stewarding our talent is an important thing. It's not just for our own good, but it's to honor the God who gave us these gifts. And super important because of that. So the last thing is to steward your treasure. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because this could go in a lot of different directions. I'm not going to give you the tithing lecture or any of those kinds of things. But I am going to say there's a couple of things that are important in this. As you steward your treasure, first of all, I would say it's important as people who work in churches and nonprofits, Christian nonprofits, to be intentional about what it means to steward your treasure, okay? That's between you and God. Only you and God can make that decision. You have to figure that out. Consider how to steward your own personal resources in light of what you ask others to do, however. So if you're a pastor in a church and your hope, your dream, your expectation is that the people in your church sacrifice for this mission, I hope you would consider that sacrifice something you should do as well. Now, you might view that a little bit differently, but what is that sacrifice? What should that look like for you? Because you're a steward of a mission if you're leading a church. And that's an important thing for you to keep in mind as you think about your own treasure. Many of us who are in ministry, when somebody says treasure, we kind of giggle. Like, there's not a lot of treasure here to work with, But I do think God provides everything we need to do what He's called us to do. And I do think this is an important piece. Pursue personal financial generosity. How can we be generous? How can we reflect not only what we want to see in our people, but also, the generous heart that God has given us? How do we do that well? Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. At the bottom line of all of that, and we all know this, everything we can do cheerfully, God loves. And anything we can't do cheerfully, He doesn't want that anyway. He wants it to be cheerful. Okay, lesson number 2 is to be a leader worth following. That's really the definition of leadership. If you look back and nobody's behind you, you're not really leading anything. You might be managing some things, and that's okay. I've got this broken down into a couple categories. Personal actions. To be a leader worth following, it's important for you to notice the small things. Not only the small things that people do, the people who are working for you or serving for you, but also the things that are needed organizationally. So if you have employees or you have core volunteers or you even have attenders, it's important that they know what you notice. And if you notice the small things, the big things usually will take care of themselves. Great example in my church that I came to 7 years ago, these vents on the side here, we had vents in the ceilings, but heat vents, supply vents, and they were dirty. And nobody sees those, because they're way up on the ceiling, and it's not something you typically notice. And then the other thing in our church, this carpet base that's along the wall there at our church, that's tile, ceramic tile. And you could start to see the mop, you could see where it wasn't clean on part of it. It wasn't super noticeable to the regular person who attends the church, but those are the things that start, and then 5 years later, why does it feel dingy here? And so, I started pointing out some of these small things, and it helped my facility people especially, but even our pastors, to understand the things that are important to me. And the little things that we started doing helped make sure that the big things were taken care of. The other thing that I do as personally in this area is I always park in the worst parking spot in the entire parking lot at our church. We have 1,000 parking spots in our church parking lot. And it's a long walk from the back corner, but on Sunday mornings, every one of my people who would happen to see me, they see me walking from the back. Why is that? Why do I do that? Because I want people to know that I'm expecting big things from God today. And if he fills up this parking lot, I don't want to be in the way. And so, I park way in the back on Sunday mornings. The other thing I do is as I walk through the campus, I always pick up junk, little wrappers or everything. I can't tell you how many pastors have told me that has spoken to them at a level that has been unbelievable for them. And part of me says, why would that be so shocking to you? But what's happened in our church world is that our pastors and our leaders tend to think that those things are beneath them. And that is a bad thing for us to get into. So I go out of my way to make sure that I'm picking up the little things in the parking lot, and it speaks to the rest of the staff, and it helps us be a little cleaner too. So if you want to be a leader worth following, you got to ask questions instead of making statements. Again, this is more generational, but 25 years ago, if you wanted to be a leader worth following, you had all the answers. You were directive. Here's what I need you to do. Make it happen. Don't ask questions. That's not the world we have today. The world we have today, by the way, I'd say it's a better world today in a lot of ways, but it's different. And so it's important for us to be people who are asking questions rather than making statements, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to be here in 20 years. Probably won't be here in 10 years. But that person who's working for me or that group of people who are working, they are going to be here. And so instead of me making all the decisions for my people, I have to ask the questions that help them make better decisions for themselves so that they learn the skills and the abilities to be able to lead in the future when people like me and our senior pastor and others won't be here anymore. So asking questions, incorporating team feedback into your plan. Again, this is kind of new learning in a lot of ways, but as we're talking as a leadership team around our tables, what I'm super committed to is making sure that I'm paying attention to the things that are being said and building that into the ultimate decisions that are being made, so that everybody can express ownership in that. Another thing that I think has been so powerful is writing personal, handwritten thank you notes to people. I noticed you did that. Congratulations on your work anniversary. Thanks for serving in this way. And I always mail them to their home. For employees, I don't put them on their desk, I mail them to their home. The reason I mail them to their home is because I want their spouse to see that they were noticed too. And if it gets to their home, chances are the spouse will see it and ask what that was all about. And so I've had numerous people over the last 15 years or so come up to me in tears on Sunday mornings and say, I can't believe you wrote a note. I can't believe that, you took the time to do that. And because it's so unusual in today's world, it makes that much more of an impact when you do it. And so I only take about 20 minutes a week, and I'll write out 3 or 4 notes. And throughout the week, as I'm in different meetings, I'll hear about somebody who did something, and I'll just write on my paper, Bob Smith, TY. That means thank you. And so throughout the week, when I get my time to write those, well, oh yeah, I got to write a thank you to Bob Smith. And super valuable, again, makes you a leader worth following. And then do the right thing every time. That shouldn't be that earth-shattering, but it is. There's a lot of times in the church world where we're under pressure to get things done. We cut a corner here. We minimize somebody because we have to get something done. The biggest example of this I can think of right off the top of my head is, when it comes to budgets, we set budgets. I expect our people to manage to those budgets. We get a monthly financial report that tells them how they're doing. Sometimes they'll make the wrong decision because if they do the right thing, it'll go over budget. And I try to reiterate with people, more important than budgets, more important than policy is to do the right thing. And, are you close enough to the Lord to know what the right thing is? That's probably the biggest question. But, work that out with other people and decide what the right thing is and always do the right thing. And maybe you go over budget. I don't like that very much, but it happens. And I'd rather go over budget doing the right thing than anything else. And then the final thing on this one for personal actions, when you make a mistake, apologize publicly where you can. If you look back at the emails that I've sent to our staff over the last 7 years, there's probably 10 times where I've made a public apology for something that I said or did or misunderstood or wherever it might be. Just asking people to give me grace. I'm still learning. I'm still in formation. Sometimes I revert to my worst self because I'm under pressure, it might be. And being able to apologize. We had a situation it was probably a month ago, where one of my direct employees came into my office and he said, I'm telling you, you're wrong about this. And I was angry, I was under pressure, and I said, I'm not wrong, and basically get out of my office. I don't want to talk about this anymore. And by the end of the day, the Lord had convicted me to such a level that I had to go into his office and say, you were right. And how many of your employees feel the freedom to come in and challenge you that way? It's hard to make people feel comfortable doing that. But the fact that I came back at the end of the day and said, you were right, I was wrong, forgive me, it built more of a relationship between us. And I need people like that in my life. I don't always want them in my life, but I always need them in my life. So then personal interactions. Be a listener. Most of us aren't good listeners. Most of us are good talkers. When we're listening, we're thinking about what we're going to say next rather than just actually actively listening to people. And so hone your skills when it comes to listening. Delegate real things. It's easy to delegate the little things. Can you go get this, or can you hand out these bulletins, or whatever it might be. It's easy to delegate some of the things, but when you start delegating real things, the kinds of things that if they do wrong is going to reflect poorly on you, now you start to be the kind of leader that is worth really following. So delegate real things, be involved in it. When that person you delegated it to doesn't do it to your value, talk through that, but be happy if you got 80%, because you didn't have to do it. And they're learning how to do it at 100% down the road. And so delegating real things with real responsibility. And when it fails, you take the hit and you protect them. And when it thrives, you give them all the credit and you don't accept any of it. That's what good leaders do all the time, every time. Appreciate, I've already talked a little bit about that. When I talk about learning here, I'm talking a little bit about book learning and be aware of what's going on in our world and all of that. Of course, we want to be people who are learning. More though, what I'm saying is if you want to be a leader worth following, learn from your mistakes. Don't do the same thing over and over again. Don't annoy your people by constantly doing the same bad things over and over again. Learn from it and become a better leader because of it. Understand the difference between entitlement and stewardship. Sometimes, like I was 20 years in my previous role. I don't think I was entitled. I don't think I acted like I was entitled, but it was certainly easy to feel that way at times. We had done amazing things. God had done a lot through us, and everything was working well, and God was moving. And it would be easy for me to really start taking advantage of some of those things. Maybe work less. Maybe I don't know. Rent a nicer car when I go on a trip for the church or something like that. But it's interesting what happens to people, again, as they're continually being built up by the body and appreciated for what you do. You can get into this entitlement mentality and change from the stewardship of that role into something that's not as beautiful. And then the powerful elixir of people who have an idyllic view of you at work, it's a trap. And this is the third time I've talked about it, so it's important to me to try to communicate this. You're not as good as your people think you are. And often we end up thinking we're better than the people think we are because of the way that they continually shower us with positive words and all of that kind of thing. And that's a trap. Don't fall into that trap. Be careful about how you steward the feedback that people give you. You shouldn't deny it or anything like that. God has gifted you. There's nothing wrong with that. But be very, very wise in how you manage that and steward that. Beware of and seek out from others your shortcomings, blind spots, and your tendencies under pressure. I'm pretty good when I'm not under pressure. I've learned how to do what I do pretty well. When I'm under pressure, I get very directive. I start bossing people around. About 15 years ago, I was given the gift of a counselor because I had some problems. And this counselor sat down with me, and he had interviewed all of my direct reports. He had interviewed my boss. He had interviewed my wife and my kids and gotten feedback from all of them on a series of about maybe 40 questions. And one of those questions was, when he's under pressure, what does it look like? And basically, this counselor was reviewing these results with me, which was terrible. But he said, you appear to be bossy when you're under pressure. And I said, I'm not bossy. I'm more direct maybe because I've got a lot of things going on sometimes. And he said, no, I think you're bossy. And I said, I don't think I'm bossy at all. He says, 80% of the people that gave feedback on this says you're bossy when you're under pressure. You can argue with me all you want. The truth is, you get bossy when you're under pressure. Now I know that about myself, and I'm better able to manage that. And so the gift of having really good feedback from people, the gift of having people who will tell you the truth is priceless. And most of us don't have that. Excuse me. And many of us don't invite it. So we don't want to know. We prefer to be, ignorant about those things because it's not exactly fun to be faced with some realities about how you're not as good as you'd like to think you are. So be aware of that. Seek that stuff out. Number 3 is be calm in every storm. In every crisis, your people will look to you for cues. Stuff happens. Stuff happens in ministry that's unpleasant. Things will get in the way of what you're trying to do. And so it's really important in the midst of those storms. And the storm I will use as I refer to these things here is it must have been 5 years ago or so, one of our pastors had an affair with an attender in the church. And in the midst of all of that, of course, we found out about that. We ended up releasing him from employment because we kind of have rules about that. And he lost his job. And so, that's kind of a crisis. This guy had been beloved leader in our church. Everybody knew him. It was really, really a challenging season. But they're looking for me. They're looking to me, and they're looking to the senior pastor for their cues about how bad is this. And so the important thing is you got to maintain your calm. You know, it's very common for us in the midst of crisis situations to kind of go into hyper mode and just boom, 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 boom. The more you go into hyper mode, the more people get worried. You know, you gotta control that a little bit. I put in here, develop key messages and stick to them. I think it's important to have generally 3 messages for any crisis situation. In this situation, those 3 messages, I don't remember specifically what they were, but they were something along the lines of, yes, there was a situation, there was an inappropriate relationship. We love the families involved. We're committed to their restoration, and we hope nothing but the best for them. Second message, yes, he lost his job. And, you know, we're saddened about that, but you can't work here if you do that. And then the third thing is, we love this family. We're committed to their restoration. We're going to walk with them through this. And our hope and prayer is that they can, you know, be restored someday to, you know, whatever that restoration would look like. So 3 messages that become your key messages. You share that with the appropriate group of people, the ones that are going to get all the questions. And the answer to every question is one of those 3 things, you know. And the biggest risk we have in handling crisis is that people go off script and they start making things up because they don't really know what they're talking about. And it gets really messy. Well, I heard somebody say this. Well, here's what I know. This happened. We're with the family, you know, and you just keep going back to those key messages. Ensure leadership members are all aligned. In our situation, what we found out is that at that time we had 5 people on our leadership team. We assumed that everybody was aligned. We found out one of them wasn't. And one of the other people on our team, though he played the role in the team meeting, when he was out with people, when he was with family, when he was with a small group, he expressed doubts about what we did and why we did it. That's a killer, you know, for your process. So you got to make sure, and we're doing a better job of that now because of this, but you got to make sure that everybody's aligned on the decisions you're making. And even to the point where if somebody's not aligned at such a level that you may have to ask them to step aside from their role. Maybe they don't lose their job, but maybe they can't be on the leadership team anymore, or whatever the situation might be. Or you work harder to make sure that you can come to a solution that everybody is fully aligned with. Watch nonverbals. In the midst of crisis, people are not just listening to what you're saying, they're watching how you're saying it and what you're doing. And so, you know, again, my habit when things like that happen is to get directive. So if they notice that in me, they know something's wrong, you know. There are some people, they raise their voice an octave, you know, when something's really going on. That's a cue. There's people that walk more. You know, just body language is really an important part of this. Warn people of the pitfalls of allowing a crisis to drive a wedge between each other. During these crisis moments, you got to communicate more with your team. Depending on what your situation is, either your staff team, your volunteer team, maybe even your attender base, depending on what it is. But I sent out emails every week letting people know what the developments are, and that we can't let this be a wedge between us. We can't take sides on this thing. There's a point at which you have to trust that leadership is doing its best to manage this. We need you to trust that and not, you know, start jabbering about what may or may not have happened. Don't let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. When it's not unusual, but when a lot of people get really worked up because of a crisis, it's not because of the crisis. It's because of this. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in God's sovereignty. They don't believe that God is in the middle of it. They don't trust that the Lord is aware of these situations and in the middle of it. It's more about that. It's more about our belief in God sometimes than it is about what's actually happening. So I think that's an important thing to be aware of. All right, be a person of credibility. Credibility is earned over time. I walked into my church having 20 years of experience as an executive pastor. I got like 3 chips for that. I didn't get much. I had to prove myself from day one about what I could do and how I would help and all of those things. You build credibility over time, and it takes time. It gives you freedom when you have it. It requires transparency and openness to criticism. If you want to be a person of credibility, you've got to listen when somebody's upset about a decision you've made or has a criticism for it. They need to see you as the kind of person that can accept that stuff. And the hard part about credibility is you can lose it in a minute. And it's really tough. That's what happened with this gentleman who we ended up letting go because of an affair. He lost all of his credibility just like that. And, it happens so easily, unfortunately. But that's the truth. You can also lose it situationally, and the situation I'll bring up here is we were building a new building at one of our campuses for a family life building, and I estimated the cost of that building at $2.5 million, US dollars. And I based that off of my experience in Minnesota, and I ended up being way off. In fact, it cost about $5 million to do that product. I lost all credibility when it comes to building things. And I had spent 20 years being almost an expert. And I've spent the last 7 years trying to rebuild that credibility. In fact, we had a situation where I said, I can't remember what the project was. We have a $500,000 project that we're going to enter into. And one of the elders on our team said, "Do you mean $1 million? Because it'll cost twice as much as you said." And that hurt, man. That hurt when he said that to me. But he's not wrong, because I lost that credibility and I had to rebuild it. And, you can be upset about that. You can be frustrated with it. All you can do is rebuild it. You just have to keep working at it. It constricts you when you don't have it. Proverbs 21 says, "A false witness will perish, but the man who listens to the truth will speak forever." And I think sometimes what happens in these situations is we end up saying things that we don't really have the factual basis to say. That was my situation, unfortunately, and it hurts. Developing a vision culture that drives results. I love this diagram. Some of you have maybe seen this, the bullseye. But if you understand the idea of the bullseye, I think you can understand a lot of people in your church. So at the center of the bullseye are the things that we will die for. These are the foundational beliefs that we have as a church, about who Jesus is, about why the church exists, about what the purpose of people, and some of the, those kinds of things. These are the things like, grace alone, all of that kind of thing. So the things you're going to die for. The next circle around that is the things that you will defend. A lot of churches have different ways that they address some things in the church. For example, women in ministry. There's a lot of variety in churches about how they view women in ministry. And I think for most people, not everyone, but for most people, they can say, this is kind of where we stand, but we understand that there's a broader perspective on this, and we're okay with that. But there's some things we'll defend. Our mode of baptism, for example, might be something we defend. And then on the outer circle, there's this thing we'll discuss these things. This is kind of things that different people have passions about, like, how old is the earth? Is it a young earth? Is it an old earth? Pre-trib, post-trib, all of those kinds of things. We'll discuss those things. This is our church, by the way. And we'll even enjoy discussing them from time to time. But we're not going to waste a lot of time on those kinds of topics. We're going to spend most of our time on the die for things. We're going to spend a lot of time on our defend things. What you'll find is that when you have people in your church who are complaining about something, often the reason it's a problem, it's like, why are we fighting about this? It's because they've chosen to put that thing in the die for category for them personally, but as an organization, you don't have it there. And if you can find language to help them see that, you'll find that you can take that level of angst way down, and you can talk about it more realistically. Or at least have a better understanding of, hey, if that's something you want to die for, then it's probably, we might not be the right place for you to be. You maybe should look for a place where that's in their bullseye, and you'll have a better experience as an attender or member or whatever it might be. But foundational beliefs are really important, obviously. Organizational values, principles and standards of behavior that we will follow. I've got just a bunch of different examples in here. Things like we'll live in the real world, facts are going to be our friends. These are the kinds of things that when we're in conflict as a team, we have to sometimes fall back and say, you know what, we said we'd tell the truth to each other. Obviously, we're not agreeing on this. Why is that happening? And so, you should have a list of those things, those standards of behavior that we follow as a team. And they're going to be different for you. They're going to be different for every team. They might even be different from year to year. I review these things with my team every year at a leadership team retreat. And we kind of keep trying to ask ourselves those questions. And then purpose. I think it's important for us to understand what our purpose is. And I just use an example here. I don't know if you're familiar with Simon Sinek's book, The Five Whys. If you haven't read it, it's really a fascinating book. And I've used it numerous times at the church level to try to get at the core things. And so this is just an example of an organization whose purpose is to feed the hungry. That's a great thing to do, but why? Why? Because God's word calls us to care for those who are needy. Why does that happen? Because all people are made in his image. Why is that? Because he created us for him and for others. Because God is a God of relationship. And it comes to a deeper conclusion that helps people better understand. So the conclusion, our purpose is to reflect God's character by feeding the hungry. There's some power in that rather than just what we do. It's a little bit more of why we do it. That's what purpose does, is it helps you explain why we bother. We can have a mission statement, but really what's behind that is, what's the purpose behind it? Why? Why? And in today's culture, that is a more important question than it's ever been before. People will ask the why questions like they never have before. The mission is what we do. Mission statements were a big thing, and they still are. I mean, we have a mission statement at our church. They're still important, but more important than having a mission statement on the wall is, are you actually living out your mission statement? So because of that, you got to keep it focused. You got to keep it clear and organized. You got to keep it protected. And you got to, in my opinion, you want to keep it just out of reach. It's aspirational. Our mission is always aspirational. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. We're not there yet. We have to have God show up in order for it to happen. But it's important. Then you talk about strategies. Strategies change with time. They're always in flux a little bit. They depend on people. They depend a little bit on the people you have on your team. You can only do, what you can actually accomplish with the team you have. They have to keep you aligned with your purpose, and they always have to flow out of these other things, your beliefs, your values, your purpose, and your mission. Proverbs 21 says, the plan of the diligent leads surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. And I think a lot of times in churches, we skip over these kind of important things. And I'm surprised at our church how often we have to refer to those things in our decision making. If it wasn't for some of these things, we'd say yes to everything, and we'd end up killing ourselves all the time. And so it's important to do that. And then finally, goals. The right goals go beyond what we can do in our own. Every year when we set goals, what we ask ourselves first is, what can we accomplish just because we're good, gifted people? There's a lot of talent around our table. And just because we're good, and just because we've got some momentum, we've already seen what's already working. What can we do without God even, showing up in a major way? And then we identify that layer that says, okay, how do we identify what only can be done if God shows up? And we don't go, I don't know if I can come up with an example right off the top of my head. We want to see, let's say attendance. We want to see attendance grow by 5%, 7%. That's going to happen. The last 3 years, we've grown by 7%. Chances are you're probably going to do that. Where's the God factor in that? You're not going to go, well, instead of 7, let's say 50%. You're going to say, okay, let's shoot for 10%. Whatever those goals are, making sure that they can only be accomplished with what you already have, plus God's really showing up is really important to me anyway. The right goals stretch our leadership and require us to call on the people of God to do the work of the ministry. And they never conflict with the other things that I already talked about. So pulling it all together, be a wise steward of your calling. Steward your time, talent, and treasure in a way that honors God and inspires others. Be a leader worth following. Make your personal actions and interactions ones that honor God and inspire people. I love that statement. I use it a lot. Be calm in every storm, in every crisis. Respond in a way that honors God and inspires people. Become a person of credibility. Build it over time. Rebuild it when it's been eroded in a way that honors God and inspires people. And develop a vision culture that drives results, that includes beliefs, values, purpose, mission, strategy, and goals that honors God and inspires people. Luke 8:15 says, as for that, in the good soil, they are those who, hearing the word, hold it fast in an honest and good heart and bear fruit with patience.